Oh, I can't even tell you how happy I am to see you. We haven't seen you, and I haven't had just the pleasure of being in a space with you, Audrey, for so long. So I just really want to express my gratitude to your opening today for us.
Me good. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's lovely. I'm all happy. So it is a good day. It's now my pleasure to introduce Alan Corbiere. Alan Ojig Corbiere, Benin Dodem, Raft Grouse Clan is Anishinaabe from Chigeng First Nation on Manitoulin Island. He was educated on the reserve and then attended the University of Toronto for a Bachelor of Science. And then he entered York University and earned his Master of Environmental Studies. During his master's studies, he focused on Anishinaabe narrative and Anishinaabe language revitalization. For 5 years, he has served as the executive director of the Ojibwe Cultural Foundation in Chigeng, a position which also encompassed the role of curator and historian. He also served as the Anishinaabe Revitalization Program coordinator at Lakehead School in Chigeng First Nation, where he and his co-workers developed a culturally relevant based second language program that focused on using Anishinaabe stories to teach language. He is now an assistant professor in the history department at York University. And so it is my pleasure to welcome Alan today. Welcome.
Nenabozhoo Anishinaabe dok ninso jik benendo dem mampim chiging don jaba chinendam dasha nungo optigo minogi jigatangi minogo na nino went Anishinaabe mis enjamigo chendama minwa dasha giabe bejek knows when Anishinaabe knows when giwawin nik bejek kenzi ba gemishom sabana giwawin nik gaba bambatot. Meanwhile, that's Ojig. Nisha Anishinaabe knows when Anishinaabemowin Revival. I'm called in our language. I'm called Ojig, and that means a fisher. And my dodem is Bine, that's a rough grouse. And I carry a second name, Gababambatot. And that I asked one of our, who I would call all of our grandfathers to give me a name one time. And that old man, he says to us, to me, you already got a name, Hallen. He could hardly speak English, so he'd call me Hallen. Anyway, he named me Gababambatot. And he told the story of that name, and there's a song that goes with that name. And that name actually is carried by other people as well. I met a friend of mine who was a fellow Shkabewis, and that's what he says to me jokingly. He says, "Oh, you're a Gababambatot as well, eh?" Anyway, my Anishinaabe name, I got 2 Anishinaabe names, and I'm happy that that Yolanda invited me to come and speak today. I thought I was going to speak to Lakehead students. So I wanted to, that's why I said, yeah, I would do it. I wanted to speak to people up there in Thunder Bay area and to show a lot of different work that I've done. So, gi baba and ba chakagunda Anishinaabe minwa get kaik get sijik minwa adzokejik. I went around, I used to go and visit people, mostly in my area, but also in other areas. And sometimes people would let me record them and other times they wouldn't. But the other thing was I was just curious, so I often looked in books. And one of the things here today that I wanted to talk about is our language. And that's why I try to speak as much as I can. I try to speak as much as I can and use it. My parents spoke Ojibwe every day to each other when I was a kid, and my siblings and I never picked it up. They actually would turn to speak to us, and they spoke to us in English. But Jibwa Namajata and Gashiba, before my mother went home, I told her, speak to me, Nishnabem Toshin Goetta. Speak to me only in the language. And then now my dad, Giabe Madze knows, and that's all he speaks to me. Well, I should say 90%, 95% he speaks to me. But that's who I started to make that connection, to reconnect. And so I want to tell you is that Nishnaabe Dok, that's why we say that, Nishnaabe Dok and Dinwan Magane Dok. We say, my fellow Anishinaabe, my relatives, that I want you to actually speak to your grandparents, your parents, whoever speaks Anishinaabe, that you try and use it every day, and that you record them. I recorded my mom, and I recorded my dad, and I recorded my aunts and uncles, and then also other elders in our community to preserve that. And just in this last month in Chiging here, Mampim Chiging Mampi Ushkunaganing, Gi Namajawak, Gi Nagiwe Wakunda, Anishinaabe. We have a number of people in this community who were born as Anishinaabe people, and then for the first years of their life, that's all they knew. Gi Kendana Ago at Anishinaabemowin. They only knew that Anishinaabe language, and they spoke that, and that was all that they spoke. But then, of course, they went to school and they picked up English. But now these people are going home, and they're not being replaced. So I just urge you all to use as much as you can every day, as much as you can every day. Our language isn't going to survive on its own. You have to use it, or we're going to lose it, as they say. And I tried to use different documents, and that's why this presentation is called Written Sources as well. I'm just so curious, I find. And I'm hoping you're able to see this slideshow. Just somebody give me a thumbs up there of the six
Yeah, we can
panelists
see it.
here.
We can see it.
Okay. So in our dialect, we say Ansokan, but out west in your dialect, you'd say Adazokan. And so I call this thing Adzokaning Zinigning. And it means in the legends and in the paper or in the books, Anishinaabe perspectives. So I'm from the Reserve, Michigan, and I'll get to talk about that in a bit as well. But what we do here, Ngake the Bajma, na. I'm going to talk about our uncle here, who we call our uncle, and that of course is Nenabozhoo. And now that this Gyaba Gontka, Gyaba Bon Nongo, it's winter now, it's still winter, and there's lots of snow around. This is when we can talk about him. This is when we can talk about all those Atazokanak. And I should this I wanted to thank this woman for singing and opening up this presentation in a good way. And then also that she also mentioned our spirits, our spiritual grandfathers, our teachers. All around us are these spirits that we call our grandfathers, and then all around us, of course, are our clans. So these are the ones that help us and that will inspire us. And I used to like I've met him a couple of times, but I can't say I knew him personally, is the late Basil Johnson. I'd hear him talk, but I liked how he called these Adzokanak, the muses. That's what he called them. And that they would inspire the storyteller to come and tell that story. So that's what I look at that as well. This other one that I wanted to mention as well that really inspired me was a fellow that many of you probably know is Badwa Wadanaba. His name was Eddie Benton Benet, and he wrote a book called The Mishomis Book. And back when I was younger, like 25 years, 30 years ago, maybe now, I read that book. And one of the things that struck me, he said that new people would arise and they would look for things that were left along the trail. And that's what I see my work as, is looking at things that were left along the trail. And one of the things that I see being left on the trail, of course, we talk about, he didn't mean that just as physical, tangible objects. He meant the songs, and that Nijo Mikanako picked up a song, and that's the thing that he's talking about as well. And me, the other thing I'm talking about is Anishinaabemowin, our language, that we pick that up as well and use it. Meanwhile, our stories. That's what I want to also pick up as well. And these are the ones that have those, they would say, Kinomadwinan and the Gok, that within those are those teachings, that the teachings are in there. So one of the things I see happening, and we'll talk about this as we go along, is some of these, I heard years ago, I went to a conference, and this Lenore Kijik Tobias was speaking there. Niashinaabemowin Revival, Lenore Kijik Tobias. She's a writer and a poet, but also a storyteller. She's from Cape Croker Reserve, but what she had said at that time that I really liked about her talking about these stories as well is that it's really the time to talk about them in the winter is so that you're listening, whereas in the summertime there's bugs around and they're biting you and you're distracted. So like nowadays, what the winter time is calm, it's quiet, it's cold, everyone's stuck in one room, and of course Gyabe Missem Agakmanda Akazawin. And of course, now this sickness is still around, but we're all supposed to be in our own respective bubbles. Anyway, now what I see, and even I'm guilty of this, but what I see are the new bugs, the new mosquitoes, Gimek, that for listening is our phones. So even when we're on Zoom, some of you are probably on your phone, checking your messages and updating your FB or your Instagram or whatever. But the thing that she used to talk about was that the winter time was the time when you told these stories because there was supposedly less distractions. Anyway, we have this, I wanted to just talk about this, how Eddie Benton Beneba talked about picking up stuff along the trail. So myself, like I said, my parents spoke Ojibwe every day, but I didn't actually hear them tell legends. They never told me any stories like this. And we heard of the Nenabozhoo, of course, when we were kids, and it was because of Daphne Ojik, the late Daphne Ojik, the late great artist. She made those books, those Nenabozhoo storybooks. And this is also another thing that Lenore Kijik Tobias talked about. Is she was telling a story of Nenabozhoo and the ducks. And she said all the anthropologists and others cleaned these stories up. She says, in the story, Nenabozhoo burns his ass. So, and then as a punishment to, some of you may have known this story, but in this version, he burns his ass. And she says, but in what the anthropologists, when they clean it up, they end up saying he burnt his thigh. So they want to censor these stories. And Bajin Akta Shingi Gishmina Don Bejeka Maznegan, Patricia Ningwas Gajetot. I recently bought a book by Patricia Ningwas, and I recommend you buy this book. Buy anything by Patricia Ningwas. She's a Anishinaabe language teacher, and Optrigo Nata Anishinaabe Bige. Meanwhile, Nata others okay. She's a good storyteller, and she's a good writer in our language, and she's an excellent teacher. Anyway, the book she has written is her mother's stories, and it's called Ginata Adazoke. But what she mentions in there is, she says these stories were told to us as children, she says, and there was no need to censor them. And one of the stories in there is called Chupajogan. And so it's a lot of these stories now in the modern sensibility are kind of contrary, and we won't be telling these kind of stories to kids. But she says that when she was growing up in Lakehead, that she heard them unfiltered kind of thing. And that's how we used to do it. And so when I've done this presentation before, one person ended up, there's a part of this story where, of course, Nenabozhoo isn't always wise. Gaego Panegi Nabuakasio Nenabozhoo. Nenabozh wasn't always wise. And Gaego Wika Gigijewadzisio Nenabozh. And he wasn't always kind. But people now seem to be just emphasizing when he was wise and when he was kind. But he was often foolish and he was often bad, but he went to learn from his mistakes. So I want to just preface this, and it's almost a bit of a disclaimer now, because when I did the storytelling before, people were saying they didn't like that. And I just want to tell the parts of these stories. I can tell the whole thing, but the way this format is, I don't tell it like that. Anyway, this book that I found years ago was Ojibwe texts, and this was collected by a fellow, a Fox Indian, and he was a linguist who trained under anthropologist Franz Boas, but his name was William Jones. And he went and went to visit some Anishinaabe, and he collected stories in Anishinaabemowin. And he wrote in this style here. It's an obsolete orthography now, but it's just a fantastic book. And I found this years ago, and I would transcribe them. So actually, I happen to have them here because of the work that I'm doing. So, and they're almost the size. Basically, they're the size of. The one is the size of a Toronto phone book, if we even use phone books anymore. But anyway, that's where you can find these stories, and then you can reintroduce them. And this is what I believe that message is of picking things up that were left along the trail. And now we have to do what I did was what they call transliterating. You take an old orthography and you write it in the modern double vowel orthography. So that's what I did. But some of you know that Mabadash Nenabozhoo, this Nenabozh, he was an orphan, and he was raised by his grandmother. This Nenabozhoo was raised by his grandmother. So he kept pestering her and asking her, what happened to, where's my mom? Where's my father? And do I have any brothers? And sometimes he'd even ask, are there any other people around? Is it just us two in the world? So he kept bothering her. And then finally she just relented, and she told him, your mother, Ginamaja, Ginabo, your mother passed away, she said. And he said, what happened to her? And then the grandmother was just kind of frustrated, and she said, you guys killed her. And he says, what do you mean, you guys? You and your brothers. And so Nenabozh was enraged at this, and he's just a kid. He still doesn't really know his power. There's a pichib nidowit, a pichib nidowadzit. Kaigi kenzine a pichib nidowadzit o nidowit o Nenabozhoo. He doesn't know how powerful he is yet, and he doesn't know how to control it. So he decides he's going out and he's gonna find his brothers, and he's gonna kill them. Anyway, he's bent on revenge, and he's just in a real bad state of mind. Niskendam, they say, some would say. Mokushka dendam, others might say. But anyway, in the story here, they say at National Mackinac area, they said, Gai wika bezangi asano o Kachigame. And Kachigame is a great lake. And that means here, what I just read was the lake wasn't still. It was roiling. Wabus nama debetejin kade dok o Kachigame. And they said that there's a place there called Wabus Namadabit. And right at the St. Ignace, if you go into the stateside, once the border opens a bit more and you feel like going gambling, you can go to a Kuwaitan casino, the St. Ignace location. And then if you take off, go out the back door there and you head towards Lake Michigan, the Straits of Mackinac, apparently that's where this Wabuzo Namadabit is. And that's where Nenabozhoo sat down to contemplate and to think. And they said, Mangashka Kchigame, that the waves were really high and really big. And this was a metaphor for how his state of mind was and his state of being was. This is actually a place on Manitoulin Island. I was told this by Linda Miguas, who's my buddy's, I grew up with her kids, Ray Miguas, and that's my best buddy when I was a kid. And the late Emmerich Miguas, his brother, and then of course Lynn. We all played hockey together and stuff. Anyway, I told this story about Wabus Namadabit, and I said it means the seated rabbit. And so when I told the story in Chiging here, Linda came up to me one time and said, you know, when you were talking about that where the rabbit sits, she said, Ken told me that when he was a kid, they'd go to Wikwemkong to go and visit relatives in Wikwemkong. And this is a neighboring reserve from Chiging, where I'm from. And they'd stop on Bidwell Road, and there's that large outcropping of a rock there. She says, you must know it. It's in a field. And she said, that's what they also call Wabuzo Namadabit. So wherever you see this, and now I have a big map of the Temagami area. John Turner, a friend of mine there, gave me this big map that the fella compiled all these Anishinaabe names. And another place out by Temagami is called Wabuzo Namadabit, where the rabbit sits. So wherever that is, that's a reference to where Nenabozhoo was, where he took the form of a Wabus. Wabuzong dash Gijanagaze or Nenabozhoo. So Nenabozhoo is going along, and like I said, he blames his brother for killing his mother. And this is a written version that I got from Andrew J. Blackbird. He wrote a book called The History of the Odawa and Chippewa Indians of Michigan. So he says this Nenabozhoo could change himself into a giant, and he chased his older brother, Nenabozhoo Minashkawan Nue Osayen. He chased his brother all around. And he says he had his war club, Bugamog, and then every once in a while when he struck his brother was flint. And wherever there's an outcropping of that flint on the ground, the Anishinaabe used to say, oh, here's where Nenabozhoo must have almost caught up to his brother. And he struck him. He struck him with his war club. But in this particular one, he says on Grand Traverse Bay, near a place now called Antrim City, he says the place in Ojibwe is called Biwanak, and Biwanak means flint. Biwanagong at the flint. He says Flinty Point because that's where great chunks of flint lying near the edge of the shore of the lake. And that's where Nenabozhoo finally killed that brother. And that's where he says there's a mound there. So I want to one day go there and see that and visit that. Here, this story, Mabadashangi Gion Bacha Bejik Kenziba, Mampim Chiging Ginjiba or Kenziba, Johnny Debaski Gijin Kaza. When I was doing my master's at York University back in 98, 99, one of the things that I did was I made that part of my studies, and I made it so that I had to hand things in that were transcriptions of elder stories, not in English, but in Ojibwe. Even though I couldn't, I was barely able to write in Ojibwe at that point, but I recorded the story. And the old man, Johnny Debaski from Chiging here, told me this story. And I asked him, I just said, I want to learn stories of Chiging. And he says, oh, are you going to school? And I says, yeah. And the other part of this story that I usually like to tell is he opened the door and he welcomed me right in. And sometimes when you go around in your community, maybe you're not going to be welcomed by people. I asked a number of different elders and at that time to share stories with me. And one of them said to me, well, how much are you going to give me? And then I was kind of surprised. And I says, oh, I could give you $50, I guess. I'll go to the bank tonight and tomorrow, and I'll get $50. Then she says, well, call me tomorrow and I'll see. So anyway, I called her the next day and she said, no, I don't want to do it. I says, okay, then. So I had the $50. I said, but okay. So she didn't want to get recorded. Then I called another old guy up here and I says, I'm a student and my parents are Ted and Angela and Corbiere, and I'm trying to do this. And he says, oh, I'm sick. No, not tonight. And then he says, I'm sick. I says, okay, then. So I didn't have any interviews. I came up from Toronto. I thought I had interviews lined up. Anyway, then I go to the hockey game that night at the arena, and there he is sitting watching the game. So people will tell you, no, the point is you gotta find people who are gonna work with you, and you gotta be persistent to get these. So Johnny Debosky was kind enough to let me in and let me record him, and he saw the importance of that. Anyway, he says, I says, Anishinaabe Chiging. What does Chiging mean? I said to him. And the first time I went to see him was in July of that year. And he says, Jajago, Gi Debajame Gaza, Maba Nenabozhoo. They used to talk about this Nenabush. And I got scared because I was thinking, you're not supposed to tell these stories in the summer, I heard. So I turned off my tape recorder. And then he told the story. And then, so I put the recording back on after, and we talked about other stories. Anyway, then I went back to visit him and I started talking away again, asking him, but this time it was in March. And then I asked again, Ani Shediming Michiging. And then, no, I didn't ask him. He brought it up. And so he ended up telling me this story 3 times. And then finally I was like, okay, he told it twice in the summer and once in the winter. And so I finally was like, okay, he wants this to be recorded. He wants people to know this. And then there's a non-native town neighboring Chiging here on Manitoulin Island, and it's called Mindamoya. That's an anglicized version of Mindimwe, old lady. And in our version here, Nanabush was down south, the way Johnny Debosky tells this story. Nanabush was down south teasing the Nottowek, the Haudenosaunee people, who was teaching them and teasing them. And he says he was down by Lake Erie way, and he was teasing them. And then finally they wanted to lay a beating on him so bad. And Nanabush was just having great fun provoking them. And then so he ran all the way up what we now call the Bruce Peninsula. And his grandmother, Ginje Babi Chigeo de Tubmori, his grandmother was waiting for him at Tubmori. So they had a canoe there. And so Nanabush Gibo Ji Maning, he jumped in the boat, the canoe, and they started paddling across. Anyway, they thought they lost the Nottowek, but they quickly made a elm bark canoe, and then they followed him. And they knew where he was going, so he landed here at what we now call Chaajwing, but in English, the Jagnash call it Providence Bay. And then that's where Nanabush got boarded. Nenabozhoo Minwa Nanabush and his grandmother, they landed on the shores there. And then that's when Johnny says, Nenabozhoo give mo man okumisan. He put his grandma on his back and he started running with her on his back. And he starts running with her, and he's running and running. And then he hears those Nottowek, and he hears they're getting closer, and Nenabozhoo's, and the way Johnny says it, that as he's running along, the weight of carrying his grandmother, his knees are getting weak and his knees start knocking. And then his legs are getting all scratched up and bloody from all the different brush that he's running against. So he comes along this lake, he's running along the shore of this lake. And then that's when he decides, he says, Gi nan no okumisan, kabibska bi, I will come back. And she looks at him wondering what he's saying, talking about. Then he grabs her here and by her lower back, and then he swings her around and around, and then he throws her. Johnny says he threw her way up in the air, and then he threw her right in the water. And this is now called the Jagna Shak Gijin Kadana Amandaminis Treasure Island. Nishnabek McCain. Dimwe Minis. This is Old Lady Island. This is Nenabozhoo's grandmother, the way Johnny told it. Here you see this is the south, and that's her head. Here's her shoulder, if you can see my cursor. And then here's her diash, her rump. It's up in the air, and then all the way down here is her leg pointing north. So here, this is a different view, and we're looking at her rump here. So that's what we say. Dimwe Minis is Old Lady Island, and that's Nenabozhoo Okumisan, Nenabozhoo's grandmother. Then he says, Nenabozhoo gi meji jibap to mampip chiging. Johnny said that Nenabozhoo ran right through Chiging here. And he says, Gega dashgi dimnean, dimneagon. He's almost going to be caught by those Nadawik. And he decides, okay, I'm going to make a stand. I'm going to fight them. Then he takes that, he says, Ode nekeing jagnashi nekade cup and saucer. He says, Nenabozhoo bigijwe banan the way chigowan. So what Johnny says is, at what is now called the cup and saucer in English, he says Nenabozhoo dropped his chigowan. And then Johnny admitted at that time, he says, Gai wene sustazin, gai go moshkin gikenzin noe chigowan, nishnabek gina kazan pi doenjigeng. He says, but the Anishinaabe used that when they went hunting. I don't really understand it. I don't really know what that is. He says, maybe it's the arrowheads. So here's where I had to actually do research, and I looked in old dictionaries what that word is. But this is what they call a cup and saucer, what the Jaganashak call a cup and saucer. And at the side there, that's what they call a harpoon head, but we call it a spearhead. Anyway, when I was looking around at different dictionaries, and a priest wrote a dictionary, and in that dictionary he said, Trigwednong means place of the harpoon. And when I first started doing this research, I was like, we didn't use harpoons. We're not Inuit, or we're not on the West Coast stabbing whales or seals or anything like that. Anyway, as I found more of these, I see that this is actually an ancient tool that is dispersed pretty much all over North America. It is a harpoon head. Technically, that's what it's called, a harpoon, because that spearhead dislodges, and you see that hole there. It actually is a toggle. And once you spear either mick, if you spear a beaver or a trout or a sturgeon with this, then that harpoon head dislodges and there's a rope tied to it. And once that animal tires itself out, then you pull that in your prey. Anyway, this is the lower part of the cup and saucer, and this is what the Anishinaabe would call michigyu. And then here where I'm standing is, I call it the spear handle, michigyu atik. So what I really ended up finding here, I took this picture in this fall. I had my camera, and I was like, oh, there it is. I was told by my buddy Sam DeBosque, we were out setting a net, and we went for a ride on the boat, Gi Mishkame, and he says, they told me, he says that this was a landmark that all the people would use. They'd see this where it looks like a step here. So this is what they call, the Jaganashak called the cup and saucer. But that's where here, this is the spear handle, I mean the spearhead, and this is the spear handle. And here, this is how that looked. But what I found in these dictionaries is that the word is Michigu, and it's an antler toggling harpoon. And then I found in those stories that I referred to either earlier, this Ojibwe text by written collected by William Jones, that they referred to that Michigu, and they call it the spine of a pickerel fin. The spear in the shape of a spine of a pickerel fin is how he translated it. Anyway, the word for a regular word for a spear is a nit, or bijit ba'agan, or sawan. And then anyway, when I found this in a dictionary written in the 1880s by a French priest named L'Abbé Coq, he wrote, even now this word, meaning Michigu, is falling into disuse because the Anishinaabe are using metal spears instead of spears made of bone or antler. So this word isn't in modern dictionaries. It's in old dictionaries. Like if you look in the Minnesota dictionary or the Rhodes dictionary, you won't find this word. It's only in older dictionaries. And the other thing is that this tool was used 4,000 to 1,000 years ago. And I found when I was at the Royal Ontario Museum, I found that they used this all over the place. And I asked them if they had any of these, and they sent me a great big one, and it was from the Yukon. And I was like, oh, I thought these were just around here. Then that's when I know that when this tool was used, is an ancient tool that was used all over North America. So the main point that I want to tell you is that it is in this is a demonstrable way that we see that our stories tie us to our long-standing occupation, and as well, it gives voice to this, or demonstration, an example, an exemplar of what people always say since time immemorial. That's what this is. Our occupation here is demonstrated since time immemorial, but it's the story that carried that word, and it's the land that has that story that actually informs us of our history. So that's why place names are important. It isn't just the place, but it actually what happened at that place. And then when you actually understand the place name fully, and then you actually understand the story that goes with it, and then maybe there's a song that goes with it, then you'll start to understand a bit more about our tenure here. I want to just take a time here, a little tangent, as I am wont to do. But when I went out, I was invited to go out to Victoria, BC, and I went and talked. It was a language revitalization meeting that was hosted. I think it was hosted by AFN. Anyway, I was there with a buddy of mine, a guy I admire named Brian Miracle, who was a Haudenosaunee Mohawk, and he learned to speak Mohawk as an adult, as an older man. I think he was at least 50 by the time he learned, maybe 40, I don't know. Anyway, he runs a school there, an immersion school for adults. And a lot of the people that gone through that school have went on to become language teachers at their immersion school in Six Nations. Anyway, so I just like what he's been able to do. So he's at this meeting with me, and not just me, but there's a bunch of us all over Canada, people from different language groups that went out there to Victoria, BC. And there was an elder there from that community who welcomed us, and his name is John Elliott. And he sang a song, and he talked about this song. He says, I'm going to sing this song, and this song is that old man out there. If we were in the Victoria Museum, he says, the Royal British Columbia Museum, he says, if we were able to look out the window, we would see that old man in that mountain. And that's what this song is about, he said. And how that old man's going to continue to help us, he says. So I'm going to sing this song But I want to tell you that it is our language. It is our language that ties us in sacred ways to our homeland. Our language ties us in sacred ways to our homeland. And I just kind of, he said it, but I kind of adopted that as my motto. So, and I hope the rest of you do so as well, that you look for how our language ties us to our homeland in sacred ways. So that's what Nenabozhoo used, and that's where, according to Johnny, that's where he dropped that. He dropped that Chigyu Ode Michigwedno. What I forgot to say is Michigyu is the spear, but the way our language works is like Latin. You use morphemes, which are word parts that carry meanings. You put together what they call an initial morpheme with a medial morpheme and a final morpheme. And then that's how you end up making more exact descriptions of processes, but also of objects or items. So many of you, the example I often use is when I say there's a subterranean passageway, and you automatically know that sub means below and terra means earth. And that's how Latin works. And then I also say, well, I could have used a telescope to get this picture. And you know that tele means over long distances, and scope means of a lens. Whereas if we were underwater in a submarine, and again, sub is below and marine is water, we know that we're below water. If we were in a submarine, then I would use a periscope instead of a telescope. And then if the doctor was in the submarine, he'd use a stethoscope. So you all know that you're just changing the first part of the word, adding another part of a different word. That's how Ojibwe works as well. So we use Michigyu, and you put adin. And adin refers to a ridge or a bluff or a hill. So Michigwadin means the bluff in the shape of the spearhead. Michigwadnong means the place of the bluff in the shape of the spearhead. And I often tell people that Spadina in Toronto, when I first moved there, I thought that was an Italian word, but it's actually a Spadina. And if you go up, take the Spadina bus, if you remember that old song by the Shuffle Demons, Spadina bus, you take that all the way up north to its extreme end, you'll get to Casaloma, and then you'll see that that's where that bluff is, and that's what it refers to, Ishpadana. Ishpa is high, and Adin is the ridge or bluff, Ishpadana. So that's it, Michigwadnong means. And Michiging means the place at the spear, and that's this bay here, the whole bay is Michiging. Well, I'm taking longer than I thought. Anyway, this story again is told by John Benesse, who was called Galgage Benesse from Fort William. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because this is, I thought I was going to be talking to people at Lakehead University, the students there. And at Fort William, we would say for that river there. And here he says, there's 2 houses of the beavers, and it's Isle Manong, meanwhile Mishipokodo Minising, and that's Isle Manong and Mishipokotan Island. So Nenabozhoo went up, he was told by the Anishinaabe, there's a giant beaver that's menacing the people. And this giant beaver, he made a giant dam, Gabaka over at Sault Ste. Marie, he made a giant dam, and that giant dam actually formed the Lake Superior. And this Lake Superior is a big, if you think of it as a giant beaver pond, then these 2 houses are where the beaver lived. So Nenabozhoo told his grandmother, in one version, this is one version, he told his mother, you wait here by the dam and whistle when that beaver comes, and then I'll take me back and I'll come and we'll kill him, because he was menacing the people, the Anishinaabe, and the Anishinaabe were complaining about this giant beaver. And the people of Rama, they called it Mishiwabamik, great white beaver. The people of French River, as told by Joseph Misabe, he called it Manidoamik, spirit beaver. So this story was told all over Anishinaabe king. And that's what I hope to have shown you, get through this, to show you all this. Anyway, he went and he jumped up and down on those houses to get scared at beaver out, and he thought he'd be able to kill them then. Anyway, they had broken the dam. That's what you do when you're hunting beaver. You break the dam because the beaver is going to come and try and fix it right away. And so he jumped on those beaver houses. And then when he got to Mishpecotton Island, that's the same thing. He jumped on that island to scare that beaver out. Then he jumped back on the mainland. And then he slipped. He slipped and he fell on his ass. And then when he looked around to see if anybody laughed at him for falling, then he saw on the shore of the lake that his bum prints were there. So the way they say it here is, he laughed because there was an image of his bum on the shore. But in our dialect, we'd say, he left the image of his ass on the shore. So somewhere along the shoreline there is a place where it looks like he left his bum prints. So, but he said, I'll leave it anyway, and my grandchildren hereafter shall laugh at it. So again, as he was there waiting, then he saw an otter. And then he thought that he followed that otter and he stabbed him. And then here's the important part for people of Chiging. If you follow this at the bottom, and then that's when he followed him. He followed that otter. And he stabbed him with that Michigyu and it. And that's that spearhead that I'm talking about. We snaggy, and Hannibal wanted to eat. And the and then he skinned him. He made a fire, and then he roasted it on a spit. And he stood him on a spit, and then he cut off the otter's ear. And there's a place up here called Otter Island, but also Otter Head. So I looked on Google Maps and I found it. I was surprised that it was there. But footnote that William Jones put in the story to John Benesse, to John Benesse's story, he says that the otter on the spit can be seen, so it is said, as a shaft of rock on the Wisconsin shore of Lake Superior. And then the Indian agent, Thomas Gummersall Anderson, when he was traveling this area in 1848 with Vidal, before they were treaty commissioners before the 1850 treaty, he entered in his diary that Anderson wrote in his diary that we've passed the Otter Head. This is a towering rock, and I forget how many feet up high, he said, where you look at it from a certain angle, it looks like an otter's head. So I want to go paddle there someday, and I encourage the rest of you, when you go paddling on your kayak or your canoe or your boating, that you go and check that out, and you leave an offering for Nenabozhoo. So here, these are older maps that show that where that is. And then here, mi dashama mishipokado wikwadong at Mishpecotton Bay, mi ma gaje anabit. And here's where he sat. Gishpin Anishinaabe geb miwab maat, Gishpin bangi aseman mijawat, nenda wenda mawat, je nana mawat, mi io bangi je bo dajagaya. And he said, I will sit here at Mishpecotton Bay, and if the Anishinaabe are going by and they see me, and they offer a bit of sema, give me a bit of sema, I'll just blow lightly, bodajige, and they'll have a good sailing. So he sits there at this place. Of course, the Jaganash, apene Jaganash dashgi gweknakadan. The Jaganash always change the name. Miwe gakadat kenziba Johnny Devaski. That's what Johnny said. The Jaganash always changes the name. Pane gweknakadan Jaganash. The Jaganash always changes the name. So here they call it Devil's Chair. But if you go out there, that's what this place is called. And here's what it looks like. And they said, me, this is John Benes's word, me deshago ma pene namadabit Anishinaabe gi namadabit me io ejanagok io asin. So you see there, it looks like somebody's sitting there, and that's what they say. And onent kadok nanabush nang meanwhile on winning. On winning means he's taking a rest. And then Nanabush Nang, that means Nanabush's home or Nanabush's place. So here, this is the part of the story that people don't like, or that I guess I should issue a warning. Last time I told this, I didn't really do so. But like I said before, Kai Wika Nenabozhoo gi gijewadzisi. Meanwhile, Nenabozhoo gi badze. Sometimes Nanabush was foolish and sometimes he wasn't very kind. So here that grandma was whistling away there. She saw that beaver coming. So she started whistling away, and Nanabush finally heard it. So he started coming. Meanwhile, that big dam that was there, that they broke a hole in it, but that Mishewabamik Mage Manidoamik came. And when he came, he just busted through that because he knew that Nanabush wanted to kill him. So he busted through the rest of that dam, and then he swam all the way down what is now called the St. Mary's River. And he went all along the North Channel, and all that debris from that dam are the small islands. That's what the Anishinaabe say. All those little islands there, that's from the dam that that giant beaver made. And the giant beaver fled. And so Nanabush wasn't able to capture him. And so by the time he got here to what is called Gros Cap in French, or now we pronounce it in English, Gros Cap, Nanabush was really angry. Nishkat zit o Nenabozhoo miu gaje nawanoata okamisan. Mizwe dashgi miskwi wab ka il with you. O makki wab kong da ishnakade gi kedo o Nenabozhoo. So Nanabush then struck his grandmother really hard. He hit her really hard. And when he hit her, all that blood hit that rock, and it turned that rock all red. And that's what it says there. Gi miskwi wap ka il with you. That rock turned all red. And if you go there, that rock is red there. And then Nanabush said, Makaki wap kong da jinkade. This place will be called Old Toad. Well, it's literally called Frog Rock, but they call it Old Toad Mountain. And that's supposed to be Nanabush's, where he struck his grandmother. So of course now it's not a nice story to tell, and I feel more heightened now to kind of soften that part of the story, but that's part of the story, how it was told. And there was I found another reference to this in the Bell papers. Robert Bell was a surveyor, and he was interested in legends. And so he got people, when he was doing the Geological Survey of Canada, he met with different Anishinaabe, and he asked them to write the stories and to send them in when he left, because he would meet and he would write them down. But then he told any of them, send them in and I'll send you money. So this lady named Agnes Cutler wrote in one of the stories, and it was called The Origin of the Sioux Rapids. And it was about the giant beaver, and then also how that dam was made. And then she ended up saying that Gros Cap is Makki Wap Kong, where Nanabush, but in her version, it's Nanabush's wife instead of his grandmother. Anyway, so Manidoa Mick hurried east through the North Channel and turned up the French River. So he went all the way along here, and Nanabush was pursuing him. And then he went up the French River over here. And then here, this is where Michiging is, and this is where Michigu is, where he left his giant spearhead. And as he went along here, there's a place called Beaver Stone. And I haven't found the reference yet of what, but I suspect it has to do with this story as well. Anyway, Joe Misabe also met Mabadash Nishnabe, Joe Misabe, Kin Kwashkwano o Robert Bell on Jaganashtan. He met that Robert Bell, and Robert Bell wrote down his story, and Joe Misabe wrote that he says he told the story of Nenabozhoo hunting the giant beaver. And he says, this was Joe Misabe who said, he drew that bluff that I showed you of Michiguedno, and he was the one that pointed out that the lower part is the spearhead and the top part is the spear handle. And he says that, and this is a bit different than Johnny's version, but he said that Nenabozhoo left his spearhead there when he was hunting the giant beaver instead of being pursued by the Nottawic. Anyway, these are all, the point of this presentation is bringing together all of these varied sources. And that's the thing with our oral tradition. There isn't just one source. And that is the beauty of it, is because many of you know, you got to hear these stories told over and over. And at different points in your life, it's going to have different meaning. And it's going to have different meaning to you, and it's going to have different teachings for you at that time in your life. And hopefully you'll find something in there that'll help you. Anyway, so as this Manido Amik was Gigijibwe Maba Manido Amik, he was fleeing. And then at several places along the stream, especially what you call Recollet Falls, he tore up the rocks, and you may still see them scattered about in great heaps. This was caused by the back action of his feet as he scuttled along on because there was not enough water for him. So this is a picture of Recollet Falls, and they call it Recollet Falls. Apparently, Recollet priests were killed there. But it's along the Magnetawan River, I mean the French River, sorry. But when you're going to Magnetawan, and you see that turnoff to the French River Visiting Center, and then you go to that French River Visiting Center, you will then, you can walk down to this and you can see it, and that's where Manido left his mark. So again, Gigindan Manda Maznagan, Andrew J. Blackbird, and I read this years ago, and I was always struck by this, and I wanted to find this. And he says, there's an impression of a human foot on a very smooth rock somewhere along the Ottawa River. And he says, and beside it is a round hole about as large and deep as a common brass kettle. And he says, whenever the Anishinaabe go by there, they say it's Nenabozhoo's track and Nenabozhoo's kettle where he dropped it when chasing his brother. So the Anishinaabe would, they would put sema there, and they would ask for a good trip and journey to Monyang, what we call Montreal in our language, Monyang. So I never knew where this was, and I was like, give us a bit more detail here. The Ottawa River is long and it's far, and there's two sides of it, and I was like, where would this be? Anyway, I went I was invited to do a talk at Gatineau, Quebec, at the casino. Anyway, this fella, Simon Brascape, Maba Anishinaabe, Kitagan Zibe Njaba, Maba Anishinaabe. This guy, he spoke at that time as well. But he went and when he talked, at that time, Gi Moshkam Ode Hull. At that time, I think it was 2017, there was a flood, and that area got flooded except the casino, but just in the greater area of that flood. So when this Simon Brascope got up to talk, he talked about how the great flood when Nenabozhoo remade the world, recreated the world after that Ojashk Gogi na din kins, when that Ojashk dove down to get a bit of that earth. Anyway, then he said his father took him to a place where he called it Whiskey Jack's footsteps. I guess that's what they call Nenabozhoo over there. Bejik kenzi ba ngi windamak. Glus cap Nenabozhoo wisaki jack na pe. Mio bejagot. That all these people that are called Glus cap, wisaki jack, Nenabozhoo, Wenabozhoo, and Nape, these are all the same guy. This is Nenabozhoo. And he was called by different people by different names. And then that old man who told me this, he says, but Nenabozhoo came to visit the Ojibwe 2 times. So anyway, so when he's doing this talk, Simon Brascope said at the Isle Calumet on the southeast corner of that is where his footstep is. So I got all excited. I approached Simon Zemo, we'd say, at the coffee table afterward, and I says, "Oh, I've been looking for that for years. Where is that?" He didn't actually mention the location when he was telling his story, but he told me at the coffee table at the conference. He says, "Oh, my dad and I went there, and he says we offered tobacco and stuff, but we had a hard time. I don't know what we did wrong," he says. So you got to be careful too going there, but I encourage you all to go there, but you make your proper offerings. So lastly, I'll quit here after this, I think. No, I won't. Anyway, Joe Masabe says that Manitou Mick went all the way down the French River, all the way to the Odawa River. And he says he passed through Lake Nipissing and down the Odawa Zibe to the Big Island where it joins the great river of the Nottoway, meaning the St. Lawrence. Here he stopped and was turned to stone like his wife, forming a large hill, meaning Montreal Mountain. So this whole story I just wanted to show you spans from Almanong, Minitiguaya, and Onenkato, Minitiguaya, Minitiguaya by Almanong, all the way out to Monyang, to Montreal, Anishinaabe, Ekwak, the whole expanse. And then, of course, I could actually extend this to Lake Winnipeg. There's another part of the story where Nenabozhoo, that why it's called dirty water, because of Nenabozhoo as well. Anyway, so here's the map. I'm currently making putting this on online with Wawindamalgewin, Robinson Huron Treaty people. Specifically, I'm working with Nikki Rekale of Wawindamalge when we did a test run of this, and we started mapping this out. I've long wanted to map this all out and put it with pictures, and so she's helping me out to do that and to put all these sources together. So people do these homages and these pilgrimages to Jerusalem, or there's one in Spain as well that people do. And what I want to do, what I hope happens, I see a lot of young people doing these canoe trips, and it's great. But what I hope they do is they actually start to visit these places, Baba Dash Nenabozhoo Gi Nameto, where Nenabozhoo left his mark. I hope that they familiarize themselves with that and that they learn that story and that they see Nenabozhoo Kinamizawe Gi Bomse Maba Nenabozhoo, that Nenabozhoo walked all over what we now call Michigan, but all over the land. That's what they say. And he named everything. And so wherever he left his mark, he deliberately left his mark so that he would be remembered, not only for all the good things he did, but also the bad things so that we don't do those bad things. That's what the elders say. He did everything so that we don't have to do it. He did bad things. He did good things. But we don't have to do everything he did. We have to just learn from him. Anyway, that's what this whole, and it's coming soon that this thing, and you'll just have to look at that Wawindamalgewin Robinson Huron Treaty website, and she put it in a GIS format. Nikki Rekale did. So it's, I was pretty excited because I've been wanting to do this for years, and I actually don't have the skills. She's a GIS technician and geographic information system. I wanted to show you that there's other versions, and this is, you go to Beek Tagong Language Project. If you just Google that, then you'll find that they recorded the Canadian Museum recorded people. And this is Louis Goodchild from Beek Tagong. And he ended up, I hope this works, he ends up telling this story of Nenabozhoo hunting the beaver.
Ingo ding Ashiwebak Nenabozhoo Ki no Damikwe 오위 지게 나가는 오기위 조가곤 기치사 시사.
So I hope you were able to hear that. But if not, go to Big Tagong language project. And then here you can tell he's reading what he wrote. He was able to write out his story. And so he wrote that. And you can check that out. It's a Ojibwe version of Nenabozhoo hunting the beaver.
인고딩
And that's where I'll stop. Miigwech kinawaya gi bijayek gi bibizindoyek. Thank you all for coming and for listening, and gi bozabigayek for signing up. And I didn't look at any of the chat. I see that there's 67 questions. I'm not going to be able to get to.
No, there's actually
Or,
one question. So I just like to
Oh,
express our thanks for having you sharing with us today. I know there was just probably a tiny little piece, a grain of sand of all the knowledge that's there that you hold. But very interesting. And I did appreciate the mapping as well. And we've had some people in the chat who were saying they had been to some of those places. And
yeah.
so that was good. We do have one question from Sandra, who teaches Indigenous literature. I'm going to say that wrong. Wawiatunug at the University of Windsor. I use a lot of Anishinaabe writers and storytellers, Jim Northrup, Marcy Rendon, Basil Johnson, Louise Kijek Tobias, and others in some of my courses. I grew up in Detroit, but I'm Getawa from the slang. I would like to develop a course of just Anishinaabe literature, but I want to be respectful. I've talked with my Anishinaabe colleagues here from Betuang, I think, for their thoughts and suggestions. I feel since I'm a visitor in this territory, I want to help share the beauty of the stories. There's no one else to teach this literature here, and I would like to hear if this is okay. And then she also says miigwech. So I guess from a traditional and university space, since you work in both and walk in both, what your thoughts are for her on that.
Well, to me, she's using all these sources and she's teaching a course, and she's teaching it as literature as a professor. Then that's fine, because she mentioned like Lenore Kijek Tobias and Basil Johnson and all these writings. People do that all over. Like that isn't just her. The only careful part that she should be is if she's non-native. It didn't sound like she was non-native, but if she's non-native, that she doesn't appropriate the stories and start presenting herself as the storyteller.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And she's from another territory. She is Indigenous, though. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. And
I don't have the authority to say yes or no to her.
Right.
When I get these kind of questions, I find that why are you asking me? I can't give you the stamp or the seal.
Great. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. But she did ask, and you've given her a good answer.
Yeah.
We had another question from Chesney about the names of the two books you showed in the beginning.
Should I just put that in the chat?
I had one, sure.
It's called Ojibwe Texts. And it's spelled, that just goes to the panelists, eh?
Oh, I can copy it and paste it.
Everyone, eh?
Yeah.
And then if you go, we put my colleague, my coworker and buddy there, Clarice Pongoish, we made a website, and my other buddy there, Perry Bebmash, we put a bunch of these stories in the modern orthography, and the website is Bidwewe Dungik. So if you enter that, then you're going to find how we transferred these. Some of these, we didn't do them all, into double vowel orthography. And then we used to have Perry reading them, but the actual software was Adobe, and then they discontinued it, so it doesn't work anymore, that particular part.
Okay. Miigwech, thank you. So that is brings us to the conclusion of today. It seemed very fitting to me that it's a beautiful day here. It's very cold in Thunder Bay. Minus 21. I think it was a bit colder earlier this morning. But definitely we have a blanket of snow, over Nenabozhoo, and it's just a beautiful time of year. And so I would like to circle back to welcome Audrey back to our circle to do our closing for today, and extend a very heartfelt Chimigwech Alan to you for joining us. And we had 199. I think we had a few more, over 200 people who took time today to come and spend it with you. And I think I speak on behalf of all of us that we really appreciated the time that you shared with us today. Miigwech.
Thank you.
All right, Elder DeRoy, if you would like.